keep my levels down, like potassium, phosphorus, everything, keep everything down. I look at it like a part-time job. I go there for 4 hours, do my dialysis, come home. Little day, some days I'm tired, like today I just left dialysis, come here. And I'm a little drained today. So if you see me walking slow, tomorrow I won't need a cane, but today I do. But other than that, I haven't really had a whole lot of issues, thank God. But I just pray and hope that I get a kidney stone.
So thank you so much. And where would we be without our coordinator? And we have Claire Schumann. She's a clinical transplant coordinator, and if you could tell us a little bit why you became a transplant coordinator and what motivates you and so forth.
Hi everybody, thank you for having me. I'm a transplant coordinator at Christiana Care. So basically, I work with patients who are ready to be transplanted. Helping, actually, this fine gentleman right here that just spoke is one of my patients. So I help care for the patients while they are waiting to be transplanted. We actually develop a pretty good relationship, because how long have you been waiting to get a transplant?
Almost 5 years.
It's a long time. So we get to interact and make sure that he is where he needs to be so he can be actively listed to get that transplant. One of the reasons why I became a transplant coordinator is that my father actually died of renal disease, but he was too sick to be able to get a transplant. So, but before that, I worked in, surgical ICU, and I actually cared for the donors and their families. So for 10 years, I worked in the SICU, the surgical ICU at Christiana Hospital, caring for and maintaining and working closely with Gift of Life on organ allocation and caring for those brain dead and donation, after cardiac death patients. So it was really a wonderful thing to do, but doing that for so long, comes along with some things too, emotional aspects of caring for that type of patient. So when I saw this opportunity come up 5 years ago for a transplant coordinator, I was like, I want to work on that side. And I want to work with the patients who are waiting, and I want to coordinate transplants and continue to work with Gift of Life, which is a wonderful opportunity, but to be on the end where, the patient comes out and they receive that gift. So that's pretty much why I changed.
That's great, thank you. Just a little bit, I'm going to start back with you again, Claire, if you don't mind. What is done in order to get a patient listed for a transplant, like Mr. William?
We only do kidney transplants at Christiana, so our patients are all, waiting for a renal transplant. First of all, in order to receive a kidney transplant, you need to be sick, but you need to be what they call end-stage renal disease. I don't know what you talked about today, but I'm sure you may have covered that. So these patients need to have either be on dialysis, or if they're not on dialysis, they need to have like an estimated glomerular filtration rate, or EGFR, I know you're all nursing people, of 20% or less. So that makes them eligible. So if they have that eligibility, they'll come in, and get referred over to our transplant center, and at that point in time, they'll do an evaluation. There are certain things that could rule a patient out, and they may not be eligible for transplant. Because truthfully, if you think about it, as opposed to like liver transplant and lung transplant, kidney transplant is actually elective surgery. It will extend people's lives and improve their quality of life, but it's not absolutely necessary because there's dialysis that helps maintain patients. So the patient needs to be well enough to actually get a kidney transplant. So they will come in, we educate them about what's involved with transplant, because we want them to know that even though they're giving dialysis up for this, there still is a pretty strict medical regimen that goes along with it, like medications, frequent lab tests. We want them to know and understand what transplant is before they actually make a decision to move forward with becoming evaluated. So they go through an education session. We give them quite a few medical tests to do to make sure their heart is strong enough make sure they don't have vascular disease. We need to be sure that they don't have other organs failing. And then once they've been deemed that they are actually healthy enough, both physically and psychosocially, because that's important too as well. You need to have family and support people to be able to help you throughout the process. A multidisciplinary team will meet after their evaluation process and determine if they're actually a candidate for transplant. And that includes transplant coordinator, transplant nephrologist who manages the medical conditions, transplant surgeon, a transplant social worker, transplant pharmacist, and a transplant dietitian. So we have specialists in every aspect of their care to be sure that they meet criteria. And then once they actually get listed, our team manages, and follows along with their primary care physician and also their nephrologist and all their specialists, cardiologists, et cetera, to make sure that they stay healthy enough to maintain their listing and actually get a transplant.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Brianna, you told us a little bit how your life had changed and that you just simply breathing. How much did you understand about the donation side of transplantation while you were waiting? And then also tell us about that when you got the call.
Which one?
So the donor side, I didn't know a lot. I had a really good surgeon. So he was very open about everything with me. And he told me, I don't know anything about my donor besides he kind of slipped and said that it was a man. And also the lungs that I received were too big for my chest cavity. So they had to cut my third lobe out on my right lung, and he basically told us that, the man's lungs were too big for my chest. So that's the only thing I know about. I was on the UNOS list, and apparently they are very strict about knowing the family or knowing who donated. The only thing that I know is that he was a male, and that was an accident. I wasn't supposed to know that. But also, the only way I can ever talk to or get in contact with the donor's family is if I write a letter, and they give you a time frame. I think it's 5 years before you actually reach out to the donor's family. And I have to go through, I got my transplant at Hopkins, so I have to go through Hopkins and give them my letter, and then they give it to the donor's family. But the call, that was probably the hardest part, because in reality, I was dying. My CO2 levels were sky high. I was this close to being on ECMO. So when I first got there, I was on 6 liters of oxygen, and that's kind of my body has nothing else to give. So I was on 6 liters, and then they gave me some high flow oxygen too. But I was so sick to the point where I was in the first week, I was in the 85th percentile of the transplant list, and then I was there. So I got admitted June 4th for the transplant, and I got my transplant June 24th of this past summer. And every week I was getting sicker and sicker. So I was needing more oxygen. My labs weren't looking too good, and my surgeon basically would come in once a week and say, "Oh, we have lungs for you," and they would prep me and take me down to the OR, and I would wake up back in my room with my same lungs, and that was for 3 weeks in a row. That was the hardest part, because, saying goodbye to my family. So, but, the third week I got 2 offers. So that was exciting, but just thinking about the first time I had to say goodbye to everybody, it was the hardest part, and just not knowing if you're gonna come back. So, but after that, I kind of was like, all right guys, I'll see you when I get back. It was the second and third time. It was kind of just a little bit a routine kind of. After the first time, I guess it's you get so nervous and so excited, and you don't know what to feel. that you kind of let all your emotions out, and then the second time it's kind of like, all right, this better be for real this time. Like, I want to get my lungs. So I got one call each week for 3 weeks. I did do the donor pool, and that is like the high-risk donor pool where hepatitis C patients, smoking, or if they're in jail or something like that. Because I was so sick, I didn't have enough time to give to where I opted out of that. So me and my husband decided to do the high-risk donor pool. So the call was probably that final call. It didn't seem like the final call until I woke up with new lungs to me, because it was like an up and down process, but it's not a straightforward process. They have to open up the donor's lungs and make sure that they're good for you. You won't know that until you get down there. So that was the only thing. That was the biggest roller coaster besides my ICU experience that I had, you know, waiting for that call and it being that call. So.
Wow, thank you. Dr. Becky Benson, was there anything that the care team did that helped your family or made you feel especially supported in that decision? And was there anything that you wish that they had done differently?
The care team was really supportive. The care team was supportive throughout the process. When I first saw Laura in ICU, she had, huge bandages, on her head. And I remember saying to her, well, Laura, now you really look like a little pumpkin head. And we stayed, they were very liberal. We could just stay all night, and be with our family, in and out. So that part was really good. The neurologist, who was Dr. Yanez, was just very kind and supportive. Just the kindness and the support, it went smoothly. They gave us time after saying this is, the brain is not going to function again, and gave time to make this decision about the organ donation, and it went very smoothly. I think my sister, I think that she was still in shock. She was, and even making the decision, it was certainly the right decision, but she's a nurse. She had been a nurse, even at General a long time ago. But she was at the school when Laura did this, and actually started her IV, in the wellness center, and the ambulance came and took her. So it was quite it was a lot to absorb in a short period of time, which would be with any traumatic injury. But I'd say that the kindness and the patience was probably the most valuable aspect. And I really can't think of anything that would have made it better. I think they did a great job. That was on Columbus Day in 1993.
Thank you. Mr. Breed, did you ever think about donation and transplantation regarding your illness beforehand? Like how much time did you have going into that, and was that a process? How was that whole process of you to be listed?
Tell me that again.
How did you ever think about donation and transplantation?
Yes. Well, I am a donor. Been an organ donor for probably 25, 30 years. And I never thought it would happen to me. But I was willing to donate my organs or my kidneys to someone. But when they told me that my kidneys was failing, it was a shock. Even right now, I sometimes wonder what happened. And I ended up going on a vacation and I got sick. luckily I had someone with me to bring me back to Delaware. When I got back to Delaware, my doctor told me it's time. So I went from there on dialysis. But I never really thought about, being on dialysis. I always thought about donating. I never thought about that I would be on dialysis.
And how long have you been on dialysis? And then when was the decision to go on the list?
I've been on dialysis about 4.5 to 5 years. I first went on the list at Thomas Jefferson. And then after thinking that I could do it at Christiana, which is close to home, it'd be easier on my family, I switched to Christiana.
Thank you so much. Lloyd, you said that, I know what I want to ask you. Have you been in contact with your donor family?
So yes, we were encouraged, I actually worked at Delaware Tech with a gentleman who had been a transplant coordinator for Gift of Life, and he had encouraged me to write letters, and so I started writing letters maybe 2 to 3 months after my transplant. When I found out, when I was in the hospital, I talked to somebody and they came in, and one thing you have to understand is the emotional roller coaster, because that was probably the hardest thing for me. I spent a long time preparing to die, and I was finally okay with dying. And then you get the call, and all that excitement comes up, the adrenaline rush and all. And then in the hospital, and you're waiting in there. I waited 13 hours. I was in there before I finally found out that I was going to get it. And then the saying goodbye, like it was mentioned before, to my family, not knowing whether I was coming out of the surgery or not, and then coming out, not knowing what my life was going to be like afterwards. And so it was quite a roller coaster ride. But then I found out that my donor was 19 years old, and I got very angry. I was okay with dying. I was ready to go. Why did this young man have to die, and a mother not seeing her son? And I found out that he had a 1.5-year-old son, and that the boy was never going to see his father. And that really hit me hard. So about 3 months afterwards, I started writing letters and sending them up through Gift of Life. And we received a letter back in about 2 years. And when we received the letter, my wife, because we started volunteering with Gift of Life to give back, so we were used to getting mail from Gift of Life all the time, and we had gotten a letter, and my wife said, "Oh, what's this again from Gift of Life?" And she opened it up, and she said, "Lloyd, you need to sit down." And it was a letter from the family, and two pictures of him with his son. And it took me probably 45 minutes to an hour to read the 3-page letter. And they explained how he passed away, that he would love to have known that he was an organ donor and he saved 6 people's lives. So he was a mobile organ donor, and it was that was the gist of the letter, and we didn't hear anything else after that for another 2 to 3 years, I believe, and I finally got a call from Family Services saying that the family wanted to get in touch with me again, and I said, "Oh, great!" And they said I called Gift of Life and talked to the Family Services coordinator, and she said, "Well, I got bad news and good news. The good news is that they do want to reach out to you and get together with you. The bad news is that his mother passed away." So I was never going to get to meet his mother. But what happened was, when she passed away, her sisters, my donor's aunts, were going through her stuff, and they found all the cards and all the letters that I had been sending up. I sent letters on his birthday, around the time of the transplant, at Christmas time and Easter, all the time. And they said, "We need to get in touch with this young man." And they reached out to me, and after 3 or 4 more letters back and forth, we started phone communication, talking to one another. And she calls me Dorothy. I don't know why, but I call her Scarecrow. So we have a Wizard of Oz connection for some odd reason, and I don't know how that started. But she asked me, she called me one time, she says, what are you doing this weekend? It happened to be Labor Day weekend of 2016, I believe, 15 or 16, and I says, nothing, why? She says, good, because we're coming down. And so they came down, from Emmitsburg, Maryland, they came up and they got a hotel room in Dover, and they pulled into my driveway, and I walked out to meet them, and I'm in tears, and they're in tears, and they came over and they said, we thought you'd be bigger. And I said, what? They said, yeah. They said, Justin was 6'2". We're wondering how they got his liver in your little body. And it kind of broke the ice. And they wanted to feel my side, which was kind of odd. They wanted to, you see where people listen to their donors' hearts and whatnot, and all. They wanted to touch my side where the liver was. And they did, and it was very, very emotional, and we keep in contact. 2 days ago would have been Justin's 31st birthday on October 23rd, and me and his Aunt Deb, we talked at length. I have met his son. His son Jordan is 12 years old now. And when I first met Jordan, he came, I was at Deborah's house, and this young boy came walking up the steps, and I'm looking out, and I'm looking at this young man, I'm like, whatever this is, and he came in, and he had a carnation in a vase, and he handed it to me, and he said, this is for you, Mr. Lee. And it was just like, wow, So I'm like, I have pictures, we've gotten together a few times, I'm like a pop-up to him. And,
Wonderful.
it's such a wonderful, wonderful relationship. And like every year they have a family reunion in Emmitsburg at this big park, and there's probably over 100 members of the family that come. And I get to go there and meet them and talk with them, and I have a better bond with them than I do with some members of my immediate family. To tell you the truth, so it's been a blessing. I hope this blessing continues.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really cool. Claire, when you receive an organ offer, what are the clinical considerations to identify a potential recipient? I know there's a lot that goes into it.
Actually, right now, that's why my phone rang, so I'm actually working on 2 offers right now. I've been doing it since last night. So, usually, like, how organs are allocated, and I'm not sure if the Gift of Life, people have gone over that, but the United Network for Organ Sharing, who is our federal agency that oversees transplantation of all organs, actually holds a list. And they let us know, based on calculations of how long somebody's been waiting, like specifically the kidney, it's how long somebody's been waiting, blood type, antibodies, age, it has a lot, and how young you would be if you're an older person, and there's like kind of a complex calculation that lines every recipient up for an offer. And most of the time it is heavily weighted on wait time or how long you've been on dialysis. So what ends up happening is the United Network for Organ Sharing generates a list for every offer that comes through, which is being coordinated by our local organ procurement organization, which is Gift of Life, because they're managing the donor and the procurement, and also the allocation. So once UNOS releases that list, Gift of Life will contact us primarily and let them know that we actually have an offer for one of our recipients. We would hope to be, in the top 10, because that's when we actually start working our patients up. So once we figure that out and we see where our patients are in the lineup, our surgeon reviews the offer first to make sure that it's appropriate for our patients. Pretty much, they allocate organs that may not be appropriate for transplant, because some people may take or may be the best. There's, as I said, extended criteria donors are people who may be middle-aged, may have some medical comorbidities that may make their organ not last as long as a younger donor. So our patients, depending upon their age, our surgeons may consider those offers for an older donor, but not necessarily for someone who's young, because we want to give them a kidney that's able to last as long as it possibly can. So the surgeon will review the offer, look at the donor's medical history, look at the age, the cause of death, what the kidney donor profile index is, and what that is a score that's given a donor to let us know how long they think this kidney is going to last after it gets transplanted. So it goes from 0 to 100, 0 being the most desirable kidney and 100 being less desirable. So they would decide based on all that information. They look at the blood pressure, they look at how much urine output the donor has, we're looking at the creatinine level to make sure that this is going to be an offer that would be good for one of our recipients. At that point in time, the surgeon would say, yes, I would like to cross-match, this patient. And usually it would be a patient who is in the top 10, in the region or the nation for that offer. So at that point in time, the coordinator, myself, or who would ever be on call, would contact the patient. And I think have we called you before, Mr. Green, with an offer yet?
No.
Not yet. So a lot of times our patients get many offers, but they actually get transplanted. So we would we review, of course, the recipient's information, because to be actively listed, they need to be healthy and have all their testing up to date and be seen by the transplant team. We would contact them, let them know a little bit about the offer. We let them know the approximate age of the donor, what the cause of death of the donor would be, what the KDPI of the donor is, and also let them know if they are an increased risk donor, like they may have participated in behaviors that would make them more likely to have a disease. And then we would let them know what that behavior is. And at that point in time, they can make a decision whether they'd like to be cross-matched for this offer. So, and if they say no, that's fine. But we would like them, if we're calling them, usually it is an appropriate offer. So we try to encourage them, but they have every right to say no. And there's no penalty for that. They stay in the same place if they turn that offer down. So if they say yes, what we do then is contact our tissue typing lab and let them know that we need to do a cross match. So we need to be sure not only are the recipient and the donor compatible by blood type, but also by tissue typing. So we want to make sure that there's no antibodies that the recipient would have to the donor's antigens. And because that would make it not possible for them to receive that offer. So, because as you know how the immune system works, if something foreigns in the body and they have specific antibodies to that donor's antigen, your body would totally attack that and it would not work, or nor would it last, even with immunosuppressive medications. So if they are compatible, at that point in time, what we do, and they're up, they make it up to a certain point where they're between 1 and 2, because there's always 2 kidneys for every offer. What you do is then we would coordinate that between the hospital. So besides, working with GOL, Gift of Life, because we're in constant communication on how, when the donors go into the OR, we let them know about the cross match. They talk to us about, how we're moving up and down the lineup. And then we're also coordinating along with the hospital, letting them know that we're potentially going to bring this patient in to have a transplant. And then working with our blood bank, so getting that cross match set up, and then also the tissue typing lab. So once we find out if they're compatible, if they're in between 1 and 2, we prepare for surgery.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Benson, have you heard from any of the recipients of Laura Beth's gifts? And if so, what has that meant to you and your family?
Well, it's meant a lot, and it was in the first several years. We haven't had anything recently, but on holidays, Laura's birthday and holidays, Christmas, Easter, etc., we would receive letters from recipients and what they were doing. The names were not included, but demographics, like a mother in California received her heart, for example. So it was always gratifying to hear that ongoing life.
Thank you so much. Why is it important for you to speak out and be here today about donation and transplantation?
The biggest thing I want to be here. So it's like, if I didn't come out, I feel as though for the donors, respect and for the ability to be able to be here, I would kind of be foolish if I didn't speak out about that, because organ donation is the reason I'm alive and it's so important. And I think that a lot of people have different conceptions about organ donation, and, you know, just being able to see somebody who has, well, is trying to progress in their life and, you know, just make the donor and the donor's family proud is the biggest thing for me, because that those lungs could have, if I didn't live, you know, respectfully and, you know, want something out of my life, then I feel like that would be a waste of lungs. And I have to speak out on it, because there's a lot of people who need lungs and there's a lot of people who need organs, and if more people were aware about organ donation and like being able to see somebody who is progressing in their life would be maybe a reason that the person would be moved to check, you know, I want to be an organ donor when they go to the DMV. And I think a lot of people, it's a last resort, and I think a lot of people aren't educated about lung transplant. And I think that if there were more people who went through it and who, you know, manage people with transplants, that if others were educated about it, then they would, you know, speak out as well. It's kind of like a chain reaction, you know, if you start it and you know, educate others, then they'll want to educate others, and if your story touches someone, then they'll tell your story, and it's just like a chain of events. And if we just sit and do nothing, then not a lot of people would want to be organ donors, and people like me wouldn't be here today.
Thank you, that's so true.
Karen?
Mr. Creaney, knowing that the individuals in this room could make the call that results in your transplant or someone else's, what would you like to say to them?
First, I'll tell them, bless you. You know, we're the happiest person in the world right now. Once I got my kidney, when I was doing good, if I could reach out to them, I'll take my dinner and I drink all the iced tea I could.
Sounds good. One more question for Mr. Saba, and then we're going to open up for questions. So think of some questions, okay, that you'd like to ask the panelists. We have a few minutes for that. Why is it also going to ask you the same question I asked Brianna?